We'll start with Dan Barber. So Dan actually needs no introduction, but I'm going to do it anyway. So he's a co-owner and executive chef of a Michelin star restaurant called Blue Hill. I'm sure none of you heard of that, but also the Blue Hill at Stone Barns, and the author of the New York Times bestseller book called The Third Plate, My New Bible. His opinions on food and agricultural policies have appeared in all major media, and he's appointed by President Obama to serve on the Council on Physical Fitness, Sports, and Nutrition, and then continue the work that he began as a member of Stone Barns Center for Food and Agriculture Board of Directors, and between the dining experience and the educational, bringing the principles of good farming directly to the table. And my family have been very happy and fortunate diners at that restaurant. So here's Dan, Chef Dan.
Thank you. I had this experience about a year ago. Just around this time, Chef Alain Ducasse came to Stone Barns. For those of you who don't know, Chef Ducasse is the most famous chef of our generation. Maybe the most famous chef of the last 100 or so years, since Escoffier. And for me, he's the most chef, far and away. He really redefined what fine dining can be, connecting it to culture, to peasantry, to sense of place, and in many ways helped launch the most popular and influential restaurants of today, like Noma in Denmark, and Blue Hill at Stone Barns is influenced very much by Monsieur Ducasse's work, Monsieur Ducasse, in the course of his career. Anyway, he came to the restaurant finally. Stone Barns is about 9 or 10 years after we opened. And he didn't come for dinner. He came to do actually a photo shoot, but I wanted, it was very early in the morning, and I wanted to take the time to serve him something. And I was very excited about this butter that I was making from the dairy that comes from cows that graze on the land at Blue Hill Farm. Blue Hill Farm is a farm that my grandmother started in the late 1960s, and my brother and I repurposed it back into dairy about 15 years ago. And so we were doing this grass-fed milk, and it's really exceptional. And the butter that comes off of the cream line of this milk is, I think, extraordinary. So I have this little breakfast for Ducasse, set it up, we baked the breads, and we made the butters that morning and all that. And I'm pretty nervous. He's sitting, Ducasse in my kitchen, he's taking a bite. And in typical French, very thoughtful. And he seemed very happy, but he wasn't, he didn't fall on the floor and said, it's the greatest butter I've ever had, or the greatest piece of bread I've ever had. And so I finally got the nerve, and so this, my broken French, I said, Mr. Ducasse, you've been the biggest influence on my career and on my life. Can you tell me how you feel about the butter? And he said, oh, no. I said, no, I really, I want the criticism. I want to hear what you really think of it. And he said, well, I have a question. And I said, of course. And he said, has it rained a lot near the farm where the cows were grazing at Blue Hill Farm in Western Massachusetts? It rained a lot lately. And it had. Actually, there had been just torrential rainstorms for several days and going into weeks. And the reason he was asking it, and I knew this sort of right away, is that because this is a grass-fed dairy, the amount of rain really affects the flavor of the milk because they're only eating the grass, right? And as more and more rainfall accumulates, the grass, the flavor of the milk. So you want rain, but you don't want too much. And so he asked that, he picked up on it, and I said, it's incredible, you can taste it, yes, it's rained a lot. And he nodded knowingly. And then he said, I have another question for you. Was the butter made by hand, or was it made in a Robocoupe, in a Cuisinart? And I said, no. Indicating, he was indicating that it was made in a Robocoup, in a Cuisinart. And I said, no, Mr. Ducasse, never. We churn our butter by hand. It's how I taught all the stages at the restaurant. The students, culinary students, do the butter making. And I said, absolutely not. We do it by hand. But I thought, the 2 questions, 1 out of 2, he hit it on the head. 1 out of 2. That was pretty good. And he started to pack up and leave. And like this last question on the way out, he said, were the cows grazing on the pasture closest or very far away from the barn? It was like that kind of Columbo question he asked, like, right? And so I actually knew the answer to that one because I had been at Blue Hill Farm a few weeks earlier, and the cows were grazing right by the barn where there's really lush and beautiful grass. And so I told them very politely that no, they were, this was August or September, and they were right by the barn. And he shook his head, and we left. And I thought, it was just amazing how much he thought about the butter, and I was impressed. 1 out of 3, I mean, we baseball players have paid millions to bet 300. So I was still very impressed with Ducasse. And then about 2 weeks later, I was up in the pastry kitchen watching the intern out of the corner of my eye. I saw him making butter in a Cuisinart. And I went over to the intern and I said, excuse me, what are you doing? Actually, I think what I said is, what the fuck are you fucking doing? And he said, oh, I'm making the butter. And I said, why are you making it in the Cuisinart? He looked at me like I was crazy and said, well, I've always made it in the Cuisinart. It's just much faster and easier. So Ducasse got 2 out of 3. And then about a week or 2 later, I was up at Blue Hill Farm. And I was standing next to the barn, admiring this beautiful, iconic New England view. And there were no cows. And I turned to the farmer, Sean Stanton, and I said, Sean, where are the cows? He said, oh, yeah, this month we've tried this experiment of pasturing them in the furthest field away from. And I said, Sean, why are you doing that? And he said, well, we want to make sure that the manure from the cows and the trampling of weeds and of diversity of grasses happens throughout the entirety of the farm, and the furthest field is and therefore gave the worst milk that a Monsieur Ducasse could detect on his tongue. Now, I'm saying that also because from that exchange, because as I looked into it, and it's sort of obvious, the furthest fields from a dairy barn are always the least fertilized, because as is human nature, if you're a dairy farmer and you're waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning to milk cows, you want to walk the least amount of area possible to get the milking done and either get back to bed or get to the rest of your chores, right? So invariably, the most nutrified, the most diverse, the most delicious grass for the cows are located in the proximity closest to the dairy barn. So Monsieur Ducasse batted 1,000. And what I took from this story is that I'm no Ducasse, that's number one. And I didn't take from it that we all need to be Ducasses, because we won't. But it is to say that we should all shoot to be more connected to the nuts and bolts of what goes on in farming and in agriculture and in a natural system. Not a natural system, a natural system that we perform, that we disturb, but disturb it elegantly. And know the results of that through flavor. It's one of the great powers that we have. And what struck me last week, some of the people I think you're going to hear from today, I heard their pitches for their companies. And there's so much granular stuff going on. It was really beautiful to listen to, because the diversity of the ideas and the passion, as you're going to hear today, and as I'm sure you know a little bit about already. But it's one of the reasons I wanted to be here. I wanted to be nearer to Shantung. I met Shantung very recently at a dinner. The inside story of, or his inside story of Tiananmen massacre, and my jaw was on the floor the entire time. But it was at the last thing that he told me that I found so inspiring and so ironic. He said, the takeaway from the Tiananmen massacre is that it was an authoritative, ultra-strong power defeating it's the David and Goliath story where Goliath won. And he said, that's not right. The truth is the people in power did a Hail Mary. They figured their time was over. And they did a Hail Mary, and it worked out. It was, in the end, for them, one of a weirdly good strategy, as difficult as that is to accept. And I would like to make that analogy to what we're going to see today, is that I am not drawn to these companies and to the idea behind FoodX because it's the David and Goliath story, although that does tug on our heartstrings. We all like the underdog. But we should remember, us just now, and we can keep reminding ourselves, that the industrial food system, however you conceive that in your own minds, is not the powerful hierarchical figure that we pretend it to be. They like that we think that way. But in fact, they're more like factories that billow black smoke. And if I were to turn to you, looking at a factory that's billowing black smoke, and I said, what you're looking at right now is the future of manufacturing, you would say, no, it's not. That was 200 years ago. But that's industrial agriculture. And we have to, through the work with these inspiring young people and through the work of people like Shen Tong, we have to change our conception of what industrial agriculture is, what big agriculture is, and understand that these are not fly-by-night ideas that will disrupt, and it's fly-by-night ideas that will ultimately change the food system. I think we're at the cusp of that, and we're going to hear more from that today. It reminds me just of my last thought, as I just saw my brother in the room. I remember my brother and I grew up at a time when we were changing from Betamax cassettes, remember Betamax cassettes, to CDs. And I think we hung on very long to the Betamax in our house. And it reminds me of this, and what we're talking about is the powerful industrial Betamaxes of the world. They're hanging on. And what we need to do is embrace this new technology and this new understanding. And if we can connect it to flavor, to taste, as granular and as myopic as that might seem on the level, if we can do more of that, we can, I think, create the kind of landscape and the kind of deliciousness we want for the future. It's a very inspiring and delicious future. So thank you for listening. Thank you.